This is part 2 to the Eye of Partridge Heel Flap tutorial. I'm going to be moving into the heel turn in this video, but I want to make a correction. In the first tutorial, I was doing a repeat of rows 1 through 4 7 times because I'm doing a 56 stitch cast on. I forgot to mention, my fault, apologies. You will end on row 3 in your repeats. So if you're doing a 56 cast on, what I did, I ended on row 4 by accident, which I tend to do because I'm just in repetition. I need to go tink, knit backwards 1 row, because on the heel turn, I want to be on the right side, not on the wrong side. And right now I would have to go on the wrong side to begin knitting. So again, from part 1, if you've already knitted rows 1 through 4 and you've ended on row 4 after all of your repeats, just tink back 1 row. Again, apologies for that error. And you can see that that was row 4 because I had 2 knit stitches. If you're not familiar with how to tink back or knit backwards for a knit stitch, you just find that hole at the bottom. When you pull a little, go right into that hole and pull your needle back and it pops right off. This here is a slip stitch, so I'll just slip it right back over. Again, go in that bottom hole and pull off, slip back, again, there's that hole at the bottom of this stitch that I want to get into, and just pull back. Oops, drop stitch. It's not too painful having to tink back 1 row with only 28 stitches on it. And these 2 were slip stitches, so that's not terribly painful to do. Now that I'm on the right side and able to knit across it, I'm going to start the heel turn next. Before I do that, I'm going to give a quick little foreshadowing, which is the edge stitches, which I mentioned in the first video. The edge stitches are for the gusset. I believe I mentioned that I would need to have 14 edge stitches once I completed my repeats of rows 1 through 4. It would be 16 for a cast on of 64 and 18 edge stitches for a cast on of 72. The way I count my edge stitches, I look for this little fold that it does naturally in the knitting, at least for my knitting. I don't want to pay attention to anything here on the outside or even close to the outside. I want to see where it folds so I can push it out See everything on the inside, and I want to see this leg right here. And when I let it pull back a little, there's the other leg for this one knit stitch. That's all I want to pay attention to. Nothing beyond this leg over here. I just want these two legs. So again, I push my knitting out. I look for that first leg of the knit stitch. I just let it naturally roll back, and all I want to see is that leg and its adjoining twin. That's the edge. And I will always count once I'm done with my repeat of 1 through 4, just to make sure that I have the right amount of edge stitches before moving to the heel turn. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. Perfect. And I'll obviously have the same amount on that side. What I do not want to count, and why I did not start down here, this right here, this little pocket, is the intersection. This will come together when you do the gusset, when you pick up stitches through this edge. You will have to pick up one extra stitch in this intersection between your first edge stitch and then right here in the instep, the front, the top of the sock. So if you're looking at this, here's your cuff. You're going to put your foot down in here, and you would wiggle your toes all the way out here, and your toe would, come out to here. So this is how you're looking at it. So this is called the instep, the top of the foot. These are the 28 stitches that are on hold. So this little gap, this little intersection, I will have to close up when I do the gusset by grabbing and making one stitch. And I'll show you this in more detail in the next tutorial, but just as some foreshadowing, I will want to pick up this leg, and I may want to pick up this one. I don't like pulling on this bar, which I know some folks do, because it creates an extra hole, but it's whatever feels comfortable for you. So again, this is just foreshadowing for the gusset, but make sure that you have the correct edge stitches before you move to the heel turn, and know that you'll have to pick up one extra. So it will be 14 plus 1 to be a total of 15, and I'll show you how to reduce everything down, and that 15 will just disappear in your decreases. If you want to keep track of your edge stitches, so you always have a visual, you can take little stitch markers, his little bulb, I call them bulb stitch markers, and just pop them in, hook them obviously so you don't stick yourself, all the way up. You'll have 14 or however many up. That way you know exactly where to place your needle when you're done with your heel turn. Just a quick little tips and tricks, especially for beginners. I didn't ever hear about that before. I never learned it, so I had to kind of figure it out for myself after practice. So I finished my 1 through 4. I ended on row 3. I ended on row 3 when I had my full 7 repeats. So in my seventh repeat, I ended on row 3. not row 4. I have my 14 stitches along the edge. I am now good to go. I'm going to flip to the right side and begin the heel turn. For the right side, row 1, I will slip 1, and again I'm doing 56 stitch count here. I will knit 15 across. Then I will slip, slip, knit 1, and then turn. If you're doing a 64 count, it would be knit 18. If you do a 72 stitch count, it would be knit 20 across. Again, I'm doing 56. So I am going to, for row 1, I'm going to slip the first stitch, and you can slip purlwise, slip knitwise. Patterns normally don't tell you which way. For me, it's personal preference. And sometimes I flip back and forth. Slip 1. For me, I'm going to knit 15 for this particular 56 stitch cast on. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Now I'm going to slip, slip, knit. And if you've never done this, this is how you do the slip, slip, knit. You will slip as if to knit. Slip as if to knit. I'll show you again. And I'm putting these on backwards so they go back into normal position. I'm going to put my needle in just like I would if I were to knit. But I'm not going to knit. I'm going to put the needle in and pull that stitch right off. That's a slip. Here's the other one. Slip, slip, slip. Now to the knit part, you will put your left needle into these 2 stitches. Let me do that so make sure the light hits. I'm putting my left needle into those stitches that I just slipped as if to knit. And I'm going to knit through this back loop. Right through there. You can see there's, it's kind of hard to see, but you'll slip and pull the yarn right through. So again, this is knitting, and I'm going to knit this through the back. Pull them off. That's the slip, slip, knit. Then I'm going to knit 1 more stitch, and now my pattern wants me to turn. Tips and trick. I would put a stitch marker here or on this needle. It won't make a difference. It's still going to have to come onto the left needle, because when you turn it, to get the wrong side to face you, see, no matter what, you have to get that off, the stitch marker off, and put it onto what was the left needle is now your right needle. So let me show you that again. And I'm putting these stitch markers on so I can see the gap that is about to be produced. Because sometimes, especially for beginner knitters, it's difficult. It was difficult for me, so I wouldn't want someone else to have to go through this. So again, I did my slip, slip, knit. I knit my 1 stitch. Now I'm going to put this stitch marker here on the left needle, because I'm going to turn I'm going to turn my work around. Let that hang. I'm going to tighten this up on my hand a bit. Now, this is now row 2. On the wrong side, I am going to slip 1, purl 5 for my 56 stitch count. If you're doing 64 stitch count, it would be purl 7. If you're doing 72 stitch count, it's a purl 7 also. Then you would purl 2, purl 1, and then turn. So for this one, it's a 56 stitch count. I am going to slip the first stitch, purl 5, 1, 2, whoops, 2, 3, 4, 5. Purl 2 together. Pull my working yarn to the front. Put my right needle into this first stitch and the next one into both of these. Now purl them together. And I'm going behind them to pull it out from the back. There, you can see it there. I pulled that way. Let me do it again so you can see it in case you're new to it. Pull the working yarn through. I'm just holding those stitches so they don't slide off. Put it into both of those. You can see how it's locked in there. Pull my yarn down. And I just pulled it right through. Again, up and down. I'm going to push this needle. I need to tighten up my yarn. It's loosening up on my hand. 1 second. Again, yarn to the front. And I'm doing this because beginners, it can be very difficult for purling and purl 2 together. At least it was for me, so I wouldn't want anyone else to have a problem. And I want this to be as clear as possible. Knit through the, or insert the needle through the first stitch, through the second stitch, drop your yarn down, push your needle out through the back, and then slide them off. You've just done the purl 2 together. And then purl 1 more, and now you're going to turn. And I'm going to grab a stitch marker. I'm going to put it on my left needle because when I turn, I'll be back on the right side. Move my yarn to the back. Stitch marker is ready to go. Now I'm ready for row 3. On the right side, I will slip 1, knit 6 for my 56 stitch count. 64 stitch count, you will knit 8. 72 stitch count, you will also knit 8. Then you will slip, slip, knit, knit 1, and turn. So for my 56 stitch count for row 3, I will slip 1, knit 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I'm going to slip, slip, knit. Here's the gap. And when you become more comfortable knitting heels, where you end up seeing this gap, you may not need the stitch marker, but it is nice to have it as a just in case, because sometimes these stitches can get spaced out over here as you continue. So it's nice just to have that little bit of reassurance. But this here, that's the gap that you want to see. And you're going to slip, slip, knit the gap together. So again, I had turned, I slipped the first stitch, I knitted 6 across. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I'm going to slip, slip, knit. Slip as if to knit. I'm going to pop that off for a second. Slip the next stitch as if to knit. Go into both. Knit them through the back. Pull off. Now knit 1. And before I turn, I want my stitch marker put back on. Now I'm going to hold all that, turn, tighten up my yarn a little on my hand. Now I need to be on row 4 because I'm on the wrong side now, plus I'm on row 4 obviously. Row 4 is slip 1, purl 7 for a 56 stitch count, purl 9 if you're doing 64 stitch count, purl 9 if you're doing a 72 stitch count. Then you will purl 2, purl 1, and turn. Again, this is the 56 stitch count. I am going to slip the first stitch, purl 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Trying to make sure that's all in there. That was 5. This is 6. This is 7. Now I'm going to purl 2 together because you can see the gap right there. You can see that huge hole. Now what you could do is slip this off onto the needle, onto your right needle, so you can get your stitch marker off, but I'll just go ahead and, come on, focus for me. Thank you. I'm just going to slip. I'm going to pop this marker off. There we go. So I slipped the first one, and I'm going to put it right back on. I was going to slide it over, but I was doing it incorrectly. So I got my stitch marker off. To get it out of the way, you can see the gap in between. Put your needle into both. I'm gonna make some extra space in here. There we go. Oh, come on, work with me, yarn. There we go. Nope. Didn't grab them both, and I pulled one loop off. I'm still catching. Working with double fingering and sharp pointy needles, I tend to split the yarn. There we go. Tighten that up a bit. That was purl 2, purl 1, and before I turn, grab a stitch marker, put it on that left needle, and turn. Get that out of the off some more yarn. Okay, there's my stitch marker. I'm going to pull this to the back. So I finished row 4. Now I'm going to continue the repeats of rows 1 through 4 until I've completed every single stitch on these needles. So basically you want to get to your gap all the time so that you can see your either slip knit or your purl 2s, and keep going until you have nothing left that you need to work on. So I'm going to take that back to 0 and start again. Row 1, slip 1, I'm going to knit 15, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, scratch that, not knit 15. I'm going to knit until 1 stitch before the gap. Please excuse the error. So you did your first round of 1 through 4. This is the second part. I'm on row 1. I slipped the first stitch here. I know on the first half I knitted 15 stitches. I slipped 1, knitted 15 stitches. Once you're done with apologies. Once you're done with the first set of rows 1 through 4, don't repeat the amount of knit and purl stitches. You just want to get to the gap, to where your stitch marker is. So if you remember, when I started, row 1 was slip 1, knit 15. Don't knit 15 again. Only knit to the gap, 1 stitch before the gap. Let me show you. So again, I did 1 through 4. This is my second repeat. Again on row 1 here, starting, I slipped 1. Now I'm just going to knit until I get to this gap. And I'll count this for you, that way you can actually have a count. Now, here's the gap. This is the 1 stitch before this gap, right here. The 1 stitch before this gap. This is what I need to slip knit. So if you'd like to write it down so you know how many stitches you're actually supposed to knit, it would be slip 1, knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Slip 1, knit 8 now to get to the first stitch before the gap where you slip knit. This gap closed. Slip, move the marker, slip, knit. Make sure that you catch everything. And again, it's easier when you're not doubling the yarn. Slip, knit, knit 1 stitch. Put your marker back on. Now you can turn. Get my stitches on there and turn. Now row 2, you will slip 1. Don't just purl 5 or 7. You will purl all the way back to the gap, to this 1 stitch before the gap. So you will slip 1, and this is for the 56 stitch count, remember. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's the gap. There's my stitch marker to stop me. So again, that was slip 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Purled 9 across for the 56 stitch count. And when you're doing the 64, the 72, or whichever other cast on size you're doing, I highly suggest that you write it down, what the stitch count is to your gap. That way you have it as a repeat pattern that you can always just look back on. So I need to purl this gap closed, slip this stitch over, get rid of my marker and put it right back where it was so that I can purl these two together. Purl together, purl the next stitch, and I'm going to put my marker wherever it fell. I'm going to put it right back on the left needle. And I'm going to turn. Get that in the back. That was row 2. Row 3, I will slip, knit to the gap. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and there it is. There's the gap. Slip, slip, knit, slip, pop off that stitch marker, slip the next stitch. I'm going to try and get that in there with no problem. There we go. Knit through that back loop, knit the next stitch. I'm getting my stitch marker, putting that right back on there. Turn. Moving to row 4. Slip, purl to the gap. 2, 10 and 11 before I got to my gap right there. Two, 4, 6, 8, 10, and it's 11. And remember, this is because I'm knitting double, so I have to count these two as one. Need to purl the gap together. I'm just going to move this over so I can get that marker out of my way. I'm just going to put that stitch right back. And I'm going to purl those 2 stitches together. Tighten that up a little. Purl the next stitch. Find my stitch marker wherever it fell. Put it on. and turn. Get that in the back. That was row 4. Now you can see, once you do the first and the second repeat of rows 1 through 4, all of a sudden this bump pops out. Make sure that doesn't slide off. See how that just magically happens? You can see the triangle. I think this dark yarn is kind of throwing it off. But there it is. Now it's really strange how one side looks perfect. It looks in line, while the other side looks kind of jumbled. That's just the nature of this particular heel flap and gusset. There are other patterns where you can find more uniformity, but this was the very first heel flap and gusset that I learned. It's great for beginners. You have less worry about holes in the intersection or in the heel turn itself. And it's very dense. Even if I wasn't using fingering held double, this is still a pretty thick heel. So you can get some wear and tear into it for a good amount of time before your yarn starts to pull and you have to do some patchwork to it. But it not matching on each side is just an unfortunate way of the pattern. So I've done 2 rounds of 1 through 4. I'm going to continue because I'm not done because I still have stitch markers. Reset my stitch counter, starting on row 1 again. Slip, knit to the gap. Knit the gap, and for my 56 count, I slipped 1 and I knitted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 across to this gap. Slip, slip, knit. Slip the first one, get rid of my marker, slip the second one, knit them together through the back loop. Knit that next stitch. I'm going to put this marker right back where it was, or not where it was, but right back on the left needle. Turn, work. And I may not even finish rows 1 through 4 because I've only got that 1 stitch left. But you get the gist. You just keep going back and forth, repeating the same pattern of 1 through 4, where you slip 1, knit across to the gap, turn, slip 1, purl across to the gap. So now I'm on the purl side, the wrong side. There's my marker. I'm going to slip 1, purl to the gap. And if anything is confusing, please let me know and I can redo the tutorial so that it's more clear and I can answer your questions. I'm not a teacher, I'm just a knitter like everyone else. So I don't mind suggestions or anyone asking me questions for clarification. And I can always direct you to other knitters where I learned how to do these techniques. I definitely learned how to knit from the very beginning from a YouTube podcaster, Bronislava, and that is spelled, let's see, Bronislava. Bronislava. I learned how to knit from her tutorials, and she's a dear friend even to this day. She and I talk. Another great YouTuber for socks, specifically only socks, is Earth Tones Girl. Absolutely love Denise. She actually helped me figure out how to begin the technique of how to reduce the gap that I found in the intersections. And then with practice, I just figured out how to pretty much get rid of it completely. I've purled across to the gap, and for my 56 stitch count, get that marker correct, that is slip 1, purled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 to the gap. So I need to purl the gap together. I'm going to move that out of the way temporarily, get rid of my marker, put it back. And just to show you what it looks like without the stitch marker guiding me, you would just knit until you see this gap. And again, sometimes you end up, especially I find on the knit side, on the right side, I may see another slight gap. That's why I like to have the stitch marker in there, so I know for sure that I'm not looking at some stretched out space by accident, and I get the correct gap. Purl these two together. Purl 1, get a marker, put it back on, even though I really don't need to at this point because it's pretty much done. And as you can see, I haven't even paid attention to my stitch counter because once you get the first 2 rows, it becomes repetitive. So apologies that I'm not using my stitch marker if that throws you a bit, but you can always go back through the video more quickly to see what the rows were for this last bit. So I'm going to, because I'm on the knit side, slip and then knit to the gap. I'm at the gap, that's it. And as you can tell, there's nothing to do beyond this gap. So just be mindful of that. Once you get to the end, there's nothing else to do beyond that last gap. Because remember before it was slip, slip, knit, knit 1, and then you would turn. But once you get to this end, all you can do is slip, slip, knit. Slip, get rid of that marker, slip, and then knit these 2 together. Now I can turn, there's nothing else to do, no other stitch on that row to work. I want to get back to the opposite side. I'm just going to pull that down a little, going to slip and purl across to the gap. And once you get to this point where you only have that one last bit, that one last gap, there's really no need to count how many stitches you're going across, because you're just about done. There's the gap. There's nothing after it, so we are done with this heel flap. So I'm just going to move this over so I can get this marker off, put it back. Again, if the marker wasn't there, you can see the gap, and all you would do, slide your needle in and purl these two together. Didn't grab both. There we go. That's the heel turn. I turn this around. This is the full heel turn. You see how it makes a little cubby in there for your heel to sit. This looks very odd at first, at least it did for me as a beginner. Could not figure out for the life of me how this part turned into the rest of the sock. But you'll see once this part gets picked up, these stitches, you will end up knitting out. This will connect, so all of this will come out. This will continue to be knitted up. And once your decreases are done, it just magically forms into a tube. It's really cool once you get the hang of it. That's just my magic loop needle moving around. So my 56th cast on has produced 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 stitches across. 16 across for the 56 stitch count. If you're doing the 64 stitch count, you would have 20, and for the 72 stitch count, you would have 22 on this needle. So the next part, part 3, will be the gusset, picking up the edge stitches here as well as here, connecting the intersections down here at the bottom, and continuing to knit into the foot. Hope this helps.